Elton John met a fan with cancer who wanted one thing. His response left everyone speechless. The dressing room bustled with the familiar pre-concert energy that Elton John had known for over 5 decades. Assistants arranged his elaborate stage costume while his manager reviewed last-minute details for the evening's performance. Another stop on what he had announced would be his final world tour. At 74, Elton had promised his family that after this farewell journey across continents, he would finally step back from the relentless pace of touring life. 20 minutes until showtime, Sir Elton, his stage manager announced, popping his head through the door before disappearing again into the controlled chaos of the arena. Elton nodded absently, his mind already shifting into the focused state he needed before taking the stage. Even after thousands of performances, the pre-show butterflies never entirely disappeared, a reminder of his enduring respect for his audience and his craft. His personal assistant Emma entered with a tablet in hand, her expression hesitant in a way that immediately caught Elton's attention. "What is it?" he asked, recognizing the look. Emma had been with him for 15 years, long enough that they could communicate volumes with just a glance. "There's a situation in the VIP meet and greet area," she began cautiously. "A young woman named Claire Donnelly. She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer." Elton removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. These encounters were always emotionally taxing, yet they were among the most important moments of any tour. "Her wish was to meet me, I presume?" "Yes, but," Emma hesitated. "It's more specific than that. She's a pianist, was studying at Juilliard before her diagnosis. She's brought sheet music. She wants to play with you." Elton froze. In his decades of meet and greets, he'd posed for countless photos, signed innumerable autographs, even sung brief snippets of songs. But performing impromptu duets with fans wasn't something he did, ever. His performances were meticulously rehearsed, the arrangements precisely calibrated. "Emma, you know I can't—" "I know," she interjected gently. "I explained our policies. But Sir Elton, she's 22. Her doctors have given her weeks, maybe a month. Her mother is with her," and Emma's professional composure slipped for just a moment. "She doesn't want a photo or an autograph. She said she spent her entire life playing alongside your recordings in her bedroom. Just once. She wants it to be real." The room fell silent as Elton's team looked anywhere but at him, understanding the impossible position he was in. The strict schedule of a stadium show allowed for no deviations, no matter how compassionate the reason. Thousands of fans were already filling the arena. The opening act would finish soon, and the complex machinery of a major concert production was in motion. "What's the piece?" Elton asked finally. Emma glanced at her notes. "Your song. But she's arranged it as a piano duet. Of course it would be that one," Elton thought. His first hit, the composition that had launched his career over 50 years ago, and remained one of his most beloved. The song he had played more times than any other. His manager stepped forward, already shaking his head. "Elton, I'm sorry, but there's absolutely no way we can accommodate this. The union rules alone." "How long would it take?" Elton interrupted, surprising himself as much as everyone in the room. "Sir?" Emma looked up from her tablet. "The piece. How long is her arrangement?" "About 4 minutes, according to her mother." Elton turned to his manager. "Push everything back 10 minutes. The venue has a strict curfew. Then we'll cut something from the set. Crocodile Rock. No one will miss it." Elton stood. Decision made. "Where is she?" The VIP lounge had been cleared of other guests when Elton entered, accompanied only by Emma and his head of security. In the center of the space, near a gleaming black baby grand piano that had been set up for photo opportunities, sat a young woman in a wheelchair. Despite the clear ravages of her illness, the gauntness, the pallor, the telltale headscarf covering hair loss from chemotherapy, her eyes lit up with an incandescent joy when she saw him. Beside her stood an older woman whose resemblance made her identity clear, Claire's mother, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's shoulder. The tension in her posture revealed the weight of months spent watching her child fight a merciless disease. "Claire?" Elton approached with a genuine smile, taking her extended hand in both of his. "I understand you're a pianist." "Yes," she replied, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "Thank you so much for meeting me, Sir Elton. I know you must be preparing for the show." "Please, just Elton," he corrected gently. He glanced at the sheet music carefully arranged on the piano. "I hear you've prepared something." Claire's composure wavered slightly. "I hoped, but I understand if it's not possible. Just meeting you is already more than I expected. Elton studied her face. The hopeful restraint, the stubborn dignity despite her circumstances. He recognized something in her eyes that he had seen in the mirror during his own darkest days. That fierce determination to focus on what mattered when time became precious. "Well, I don't have my stage glasses on yet, so you'll have to forgive me if I miss a note," Elton said, moving toward the piano. "Shall we?" Claire's mother gasped softly. "Really? You'll actually play with her?" "I didn't become a musician to turn down a duet with a Juilliard pianist," Elton replied, helping Claire position her wheelchair at the lower end of the keyboard. "Though I should warn you, I never actually learned to read music properly." Claire laughed, a bright, genuine sound that momentarily transformed her from patient back to the young artist she truly was. "I know. I read that in your autobiography. Don't worry, I've simplified your part." The casual confidence in her statement made Elton laugh in return. "Well then, Professor Donnelly, I'm in your hands." As Claire positioned her slender fingers over the keys, Elton noticed the IV port taped to the back of her hand, a stark reminder of the battle raging inside her seemingly fragile body. Yet when she began to play the introductory notes of the arrangement, there was nothing fragile about her performance. Her touch was masterful, the arrangement thoughtful. She had reimagined his simple ballad as a conversation between two pianos, preserving its emotional core while creating space for interplay that hadn't existed in the original. Elton joined as indicated, following her lead with genuine admiration. He had performed with the world's greatest musicians across his lengthy career, but there was something uniquely moving about this impromptu duet in an empty VIP lounge with a young woman whose love for music refused to be dimmed by her prognosis. As they played, Elton noticed that Claire's mother had taken out her phone to record the moment. Normally his team would have immediately intervened. Recording was strictly prohibited in these settings. But Elton caught his security chief's eye and gave a small nod of permission. The final notes lingered in the air as their hands stilled on the keys. For a moment, no one spoke, the shared magic of the moment holding them in a brief suspension of reality where there was no illness, no looming concert, nothing but the lingering resonance of music. "That was," Elton began, then found himself uncharacteristically at a loss for words. Claire looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes but not falling. "Thank you," she said simply. It was in that moment that Elton made a decision that would change not only the night ahead, but potentially the remainder of his farewell tour. A decision that, unknown to him, would resonate far beyond this private moment and ultimately touch millions. "Claire," he said quietly, "would you consider playing this again? Tonight, on stage." The security chief visibly stiffened. Emma nearly dropped her tablet. Claire's mother's hand flew to her mouth, and Claire herself stared at him in disbelief. "On stage? In the actual concert?" Elton nodded, surprising himself with the certainty he felt. "That arrangement is too beautiful to be heard by just us. It deserves an audience." "But I haven't," Claire stammered. "Neither had I, the first time I played for an audience," Elton replied gently. "Sometimes you just need someone to open the door." What Elton couldn't possibly know was how this spontaneous invitation would set in motion events that would transform not just one evening, but would ripple outward to touch countless lives, including his own, in ways none of them could yet imagine. "Absolutely not." Marcus Henderson, Elton's tour director, paced the cramped backstage office. "We cannot put an untested performer on stage in a sold-out arena. The insurance alone." "I'm not asking permission, Marcus," Elton replied calmly. He sat composed, already in his first costume for the evening, a relatively subdued midnight blue suit adorned with crystals that caught the light with every movement. "I'm telling you what's going to happen." The room was crowded with key personnel. Emma, the security chief, the stage manager, two representatives from the venue, and Elton's longtime band director, Davy Johnstone, who had remained characteristically quiet throughout the heated discussion. "It's 4 minutes," Elton continued. "One song. We'll bring out a second piano. Claire plays her arrangement with me, and then we continue with the show. And if she freezes, if she can't handle the pressure, if she—" Marcus stopped abruptly, clearly uncomfortable with voicing his actual concern. "If she what, Marcus?" Elton challenged quietly. "Has a medical emergency on stage? Is that what you're worried about?" The room fell uncomfortably silent. "Yes," Marcus finally admitted. "Among other things, Sir Elton, I admire your compassion, but we have a responsibility to 20,000 people who've paid to see a specific show, and they'll get it," Elton assured him. with one brief, beautiful addition. Davy finally spoke up. The girl can play, Marcus. I heard her through the door. She's exceptional. That's not the point. I believe it's exactly the point, Elton interrupted. Music is why we're all here, isn't it? Or have we forgotten that beneath the pyrotechnics and the merchandising, the subtle rebuke hung in the air? After nearly 5 decades together, Elton and Davy exchanged a look of perfect understanding. They had both witnessed the gradual transformation of rock concerts from raw musical experiences to meticulously produced spectacles, a transformation they had helped pioneer yet sometimes privately lamented. Marcus sighed, recognizing defeat. Fine, but the venue needs additional waivers signed, and we'll need to brief security, adjust the lighting cues, reposition the second piano. Then I suggest we stop arguing and get to work, Elton replied, rising from his chair. The opening act finishes in 15 minutes. In another room down the corridor, Claire sat with her mother, both still processing Elton's unexpected invitation. Honey, you don't have to do this, her mother said gently. Just meeting him, playing for him privately. That was already your dream come true. Claire looked down at her hands. Despite the weight loss and fatigue that had become her constant companions, her fingers remained strong and nimble, a pianist's hands, somehow spared from the ravages of her treatment. I need to do this, Mom, she said quietly. Not just for me. Before her mother could respond, there was a knock at the door. Emma entered, accompanied by a woman carrying a garment bag. Claire, we found something for you to wear if you'd like, Emma explained. And our hair and makeup team is ready whenever you are. Claire's mother looked startled. That's very kind, but is all that necessary? Claire's comfortable as she is. It was a protective response born from months of watching her daughter's body change, her sense of self sometimes disappearing beneath the clinical reality of her illness. Hospital gowns and headscarves had replaced the stylish outfits that once filled Claire's closet. Mom, I want to look like a performer, not a patient, Claire said firmly. Just for tonight. Emma smiled with understanding. We'll be gentle, I promise. And we've brought some options that should work with your port and be comfortable. As the stylist helped Claire into a private dressing area, Emma stayed behind with Claire's mother. Mrs. Donnelly, there are some forms we need you to sign, she began carefully. Forms. Standard releases. Since Claire will be performing. Claire's mother's composure finally cracked. My daughter is dying, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She has weeks left, maybe. Do you understand that? This isn't the beginning of some career. It's her last chance to— She couldn't finish the sentence. Emma set the papers aside and took the woman's trembling hands in her own. I know, she said simply. Elton knows too. That's why we're doing this. Meanwhile, as the venue's staff scrambled to accommodate the last-minute change to the show, Elton had insisted on a moment alone. In his private dressing room, he sat at his makeup table, staring at his reflection without really seeing it. Claire's arrangement of Your Song had affected him more deeply than he'd admitted to anyone. There was something in her interpretation that had transported him back to 1969, when he and Bernie Taupin were just 2 young dreamers, before fame and addiction and loss had complicated everything. He opened a drawer and withdrew a well-worn leather case. Inside was a collection of AA sobriety chips marking his journey from the depths of addiction to 30 years of recovery. He ran his thumb over the latest chip, a ritual that had become almost unconscious over the years. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. 5 minutes, Sir Elton, called the stage manager. Thank you, he replied, returning the case to its drawer. When he emerged, he found Claire waiting in the wings, transformed by the styling team into a vision that made his heart ache. Gone was the headscarf, replaced by a subtle, elegant wig that framed her face perfectly. Her gaunt features had been softened with skillful makeup, and she wore a midnight blue dress that, by either coincidence or design, complemented Elton's own outfit. But it was the spark in her eyes that truly struck him, a fierce determination that transcended her physical condition. Nervous? He asked, coming to stand beside her wheelchair. Terrified, she admitted with a small laugh, but in the best possible way. Good. A little terror keeps us honest. He squeezed her shoulder gently. I still get nervous every single time. You do not, she challenged with a smile. 50 years on stage and my heart still pounds before that first song, he insisted. The day it doesn't is the day I should stop performing. They watched together as the massive stage came to life, the band taking their positions while 20,000 fans roared in anticipation. Claire, Elton said suddenly, may I ask why this particular song? Out of all my work? She was quiet for a moment before answering. When I was diagnosed last year, the doctors immediately started talking about aggressive treatments, clinical trials, statistics. My whole life became about fighting to stay alive. Music was the only thing that still made me feel like me. She looked up at him. There's a line in your song, "How wonderful life is while you're in the world." That became my mantra, not about someone else but about myself. A reminder to cherish each day I'm still here. Elton felt a lump form in his throat. In all the years he'd performed that song, easily thousands of times, he'd never heard this interpretation. That's beautiful, Claire. I used to play it every morning," she continued. "It became a promise to myself that no matter how sick I felt, how scared I was, I would find something wonderful about being alive that day." The stage manager approached. 2 minutes, Sir Elton." Claire suddenly looked uncertain. "The audience came to see you, not some random girl they've never heard of. What if they're disappointed? Do you know what the greatest gift a performer can give an audience?" Elton asked. Claire shook her head. "Authenticity. Not perfection. Authenticity. When you play from your heart, they'll feel it." He smiled. "Trust me on this. I've had nights where I've hit every note perfectly and felt nothing, and nights where I've struggled vocally but had 20,000 people in tears because the emotion was real." The opening strains of Benny and the Jets filled the arena as the band began, the crowd erupting in recognition. "That's my cue," Elton said. "You'll come out after the 4th song. Davy will bring you to the piano himself." Claire nodded, then caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Sir Elton, thank you. Not just for tonight, but for your music. It's been," she searched for the right words, "it's been the soundtrack of my survival." As Elton took the stage to thunderous applause, he carried Claire's words with him. For the first hour of his performance, he sang with an intensity that his band immediately noticed. Each song delivered as if it were both the first and last time. After Tiny Dancer, as the crowd's cheers began to fade, Elton remained seated at his grand piano, instead of rising for the costume change that was scheduled. "I'd like to do something a bit different tonight," he said into the microphone, his voice echoing through the arena. "Music has always been about connection for me, about how a song can build a bridge between strangers." The audience quieted, sensing the deviation from the usual script. "Earlier today I met an extraordinary young woman named Claire. She's a brilliant pianist who's facing some significant challenges with more courage than I could imagine." Elton paused, unusually emotional. "She showed me a new way to hear a very old song of mine, and with your permission, I'd like to invite her to share it with all of us." The crowd applauded, uncertain but willing to follow wherever Elton led them. As Davy escorted Claire's wheelchair onto the stage, a second piano was rolled into position. The spotlight found her, and a collective murmur rippled through the arena. Recognition of her youth, her obvious illness, and the unexpected intimacy of the moment breaking through the polished spectacle of the concert. What no one yet realized, not Elton, not Claire's mother watching anxiously from the wings, not the thousands of fans with phones now raised to capture this unexpected moment, was that this single performance would soon catalyze events that would extend far beyond this one night, this one venue, or even this one young woman's fight against cancer. For in the audience sat someone whose presence would turn this beautiful moment into something none of them could have anticipated. Someone whose decision to attend the concert that night would change everything that followed. The spotlight embraced Claire as her fingers hovered over the keys. For a moment, the arena fell into a silence so profound that Elton could hear his own heartbeat. 20,000 people collectively held their breath, witnessing something they hadn't paid for, but would remember long after the pyrotechnics and hit songs faded from memory. This arrangement is called Our Song. Claire spoke into the microphone positioned near her lips, her voice clear despite her weakened state. Because music belongs to all of us. When Claire struck the first note, the transformation was immediate. Gone was any trace of illness or fragility. Her hands moved with confident precision, building the familiar introduction with subtle variations that made the classic composition feel both nostalgic and entirely new. Elton watched her for several measures before joining in, allowing her arrangement to establish itself. The audience, initially silent out of respect or perhaps uncertainty, began to recognize the melody. A wave of recognition rippled through the arena. As Elton's hands found their place in Claire's arrangement, something extraordinary happened. The seasoned performer who had played this song countless times across 5 decades felt himself rediscovering it through her interpretation. Where his version had always emphasized the heartfelt lyrics, Claire's arrangement celebrated the conversation between the notes themselves, the spaces between sounds that gave the melody its emotional resonance. In the third row, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Chen sat motionless, her concert program forgotten in her lap. As head of oncology research at Memorial Sloan Kettering, she had dedicated 20 years to understanding the mechanisms of pancreatic cancer, the same disease now visible in the young pianist's frame. But it wasn't Claire's medical condition that held her attention. It was the unmistakable brilliance of her musicianship. "Who is she?" Rebecca whispered to her husband beside her. "I don't know," he replied, equally transfixed. "But everyone's recording this." Indeed, thousands of phones were raised throughout the arena, capturing the duet from every angle. Despite strict policies against recording, not a single security guard moved to intervene. Even they stood watching, understanding on some instinctive level that they were witnessing something that transcended ordinary rules. As Claire and Elton approached the final chorus, she introduced a minor key variation that hadn't been in their rehearsal, an improvised bridge that spoke of both profound loss and enduring hope. Elton followed her lead without hesitation, his decades of musical intuition allowing him to complement her innovation seamlessly. In the wings, Claire's mother pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming unchecked down her face. Emma stood beside her, having abandoned her tablet and scheduling concerns entirely. The tour director, Marcus, watching the monitors backstage, had stopped pacing, his earlier objections forgotten as he witnessed the audience's rapt attention. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of perfect stillness, that sacred pause between the end of a performance and the beginning of response. Then the arena erupted. The standing ovation was immediate and unanimous. People who had come expecting entertainment found themselves moved to tears instead. Elton rose from his bench and moved to Claire's side, taking her hand and raising it as one would acknowledge a fellow headliner rather than a guest performer. "Claire Donnelly, everyone," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "Remember that name." What none of them could have anticipated was how prophetic those words would prove to be. The viral explosion began before the concert had even ended. Clips of Claire and Elton's duet appeared across social media platforms, spreading with the particular velocity reserved for content that strikes a universal emotional chord. By morning, the hashtag #ClaireDonnelly was trending globally. In her hotel room the following day, Claire sat propped against pillows, exhausted but animated as she scrolled through her suddenly overwhelming social media accounts. "Mom, Yo-Yo Ma just shared the video," she gasped. He called it a testament to music's transcendent power. Her mother, who had barely slept, managed a smile as she arranged Claire's medications on the bedside table. The exertion of the previous night had taken its physical toll, but Claire's spirits remained buoyant in a way her mother hadn't witnessed since before the diagnosis. "The hotel says there are reporters in the lobby," her mother said cautiously. "Elton's team is handling them, but they're asking if you'd like to make a statement." Claire looked up from her phone. "A statement? You don't have to do anything you don't want to," her mother assured her quickly. This was meant to be a special moment, not the beginning of some media circus. Claire was quiet for a moment, considering. "Actually, I think I do want to say something." She set her phone aside. "But not about me. About music therapy programs and cancer treatment." Her mother's expression softened with understanding. During Claire's months of treatment, the hospital's limited music therapy program had been a rare bright spot, though funding cuts had recently reduced its availability precisely when Claire had needed it most. "That's my girl," her mother said softly. A gentle knock at the door interrupted them. It was Emma, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry to intrude," she began, "but there's someone here who's quite insistent on meeting Claire. Normally we wouldn't disturb you, but Sir Elton thought you might want to take this particular meeting." Behind Emma stood an elegant Asian woman in her 50s, with a purposeful demeanor that suggested someone accustomed to navigating important rooms. "Claire Donnelly? I'm Dr. Rebecca Chen from Memorial Sloan Kettering." She stepped forward, extending her hand. "I was at the concert last night, and I wonder if you might have a few minutes to talk." Claire exchanged a puzzled glance with her mother. "About the performance?" Dr. Chen smiled. "About that, yes. And about a clinical trial we're developing that I believe you might be uniquely qualified for." 3 days later, Elton sat in his private jet, reviewing the set list for that evening's performance in Chicago. Since the night with Claire, he had added a solo piano arrangement of Your Song to close each show, stripping away the production to honor the spirit of Claire's interpretation. His phone chimed with a message. It was a video from Claire, recorded from her hospital bed at Memorial Sloan Kettering, where she was now undergoing evaluation for Dr. Chen's experimental treatment protocol. Guess what? Claire's face filled the screen, looking tired but animated. The Claire Donnelly Music Therapy Foundation just received its first major donation. Anonymously, she raised an eyebrow knowingly. "Would you happen to know anything about that, Sir Elton?" Elton smiled. The foundation had been Claire's idea, born in the whirlwind of attention following their performance. Rather than focusing on her own story, she had leveraged the sudden spotlight to advocate for expanding music therapy programs in cancer treatment centers. "No idea what you're talking about," Elton replied in a text message, though of course he had orchestrated the 7-figure donation through one of his charitable foundations. What he hadn't expected was how quickly others would follow suit. Major music labels, streaming platforms, and several of his celebrity friends had already pledged support after seeing the viral video and learning of Claire's initiative. Another message arrived. This one from Davy Johnstone. "Have you seen this?" Attached was a link to an article in a major medical journal. The headline read, "Neuroscientists identify potential links between music engagement and enhanced response to immunotherapy in pancreatic cancer patients." The article cited Dr. Chen's preliminary research, which had been accelerated following her observation of Claire's performance and subsequent discovery of Claire's unusually stable condition despite the advanced stage of her disease. Chen hypothesized that Claire's deep daily engagement with music might have contributed to maintaining certain neural pathways that potentially enhanced her immunological response. It was preliminary, speculative, but it had secured funding for a broader study that might help others, regardless of what happened with Claire's own prognosis. Elton set down his phone, gazing out the jet's window at the clouds below. Throughout his career, he had seen music work its particular magic countless times, bringing strangers together, healing personal wounds, even raising millions for causes like AIDS research through his foundation. But this was different. Claire's moment on stage had set in motion something that transcended even his most optimistic hopes when he'd impulsively invited her to perform. His reverie was interrupted by his manager entering the cabin. "We need to talk about the rest of the tour," he began tentatively. "The promoters are calling nonstop. Everyone wants to know if Claire will be appearing at other venues." Elton shook his head. "Claire needs to focus on her treatment. This isn't about selling more tickets." "I understand that," his manager replied carefully. "But there's another option to consider. What about inviting different local musicians at each stop? Young talent facing health challenges, perhaps. It could extend what Claire started." Elton looked up sharply, prepared to dismiss the idea as exploitative, until he recognized the genuine inspiration behind it. Not a commercial ploy, but a way to multiply the unexpected gift that Claire had given them all. "Let me think about it," he said finally. That evening, before 20,000 fans in Chicago, Elton sat alone at his piano after the band had taken their bows. "Some of you may have seen what happened at our show earlier this week," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed arena. "A remarkable young woman named Claire Donnelly reminded me why I started playing music in the first place. Not for fame or success, but because music has the power to make us feel less alone in our most difficult moments." He placed his hands on the keys. "Claire is fighting her battle now, but she's also started something important. A foundation to bring music therapy to cancer patients everywhere. I've put links to it on all my social platforms." The audience applauded supportively. "Tonight I'd like to close with Claire's arrangement of your song, and I want to make an announcement." He paused. Decision made. For the remainder of this farewell tour, we'll be featuring local musicians who, like Claire, have found strength through music during their own health challenges. The cheers that greeted this announcement confirmed what Elton had sensed, that Claire's 4 minutes on stage had tapped into something people desperately needed. Not just entertainment, but genuine human connection. 6 months later, Claire sat in a recording studio, headphones over her wispy, regrown hair, making final adjustments to the master recordings of The Claire Donnelly Project, an album featuring her arrangements performed by a stunning array of musical legends who had volunteered their talents. The experimental treatment had not been a cure. Her cancer remained present, though its progression had slowed beyond the doctor's expectations. Whether this was due to the treatment protocol, her continued immersion in music, or simply the statistical outliers that appeared in every disease study, no one could say with certainty. What was clear was that Claire now measured her life not in the weeks her original prognosis had granted her, but in the impact she was creating. The foundation had helped establish music therapy programs in 17 cancer centers across the country. Dr. Chen's research, while still preliminary, had secured major funding for a multi-year study. And Elton had kept his promise. At every stop on his farewell tour, local musicians facing health challenges had joined him on stage, each bringing their unique interpretation to the music while raising awareness for Claire's foundation. "Ready for a visitor?" Emma's familiar voice came through the studio door. Claire looked up to see Elton entering, having just flown in from the European leg of his tour. "How's it coming?" he asked, settling into a chair beside her at the mixing console. "Almost finished," Claire replied, removing her headphones, "though I still think your vocal on track 3 needs another take." Elton laughed. Always the perfectionist. They sat in comfortable silence, listening as the engineer played back a section featuring Claire's piano intertwined with contributions from musicians across genres: classical, jazz, rock, hip-hop, all inspired by her original arrangement. "You know," Elton said finally, "when I invited you on stage that night, I thought I was giving you something. I never imagined how much you would give all of us in return." Claire smiled. "That's how music works, isn't it? It's never just going in one direction." The track reached its final notes, Claire's piano carrying the melody as the other elements gradually faded, leaving only the pure, simple theme that had started it all 50 years earlier. "How wonderful life is," Elton mused, quoting his own lyrics. Claire reached over to squeeze his hand. "While we're in the world," she completed softly. Outside the studio, beyond the walls of the building, the work they had begun together continued to spread, a legacy not of fame or fortune, but of the quiet, profound ways that music could transform lives, one note at a time. In hospital rooms and treatment centers across the country, patients who had never heard of Claire Donnelly before that viral moment were now benefiting from the programs her foundation had established. Medical researchers were exploring new frontiers at the intersection of music, neuroscience, and immunology, and musicians everywhere were rediscovering the power of their art to heal, not just entertain, all because one dying young woman had dared to arrange a beloved classic in her own voice, and a veteran performer had been humble enough to listen.